All right. So yeah, as Dan said, I'm going to be talking about how we did some line balancing and standard work creation in an automotive paint shop. So a little bit of background of ROI and myself. So we're an engineering consulting firm. We have been around since 2016. I've been around kind of since the inception. We've grown to, I think we have about 60 employees now. So we've experienced a lot of great growth. I'm a project manager. I've worked mostly in tier one and big three, mostly automotive. Majority of my time I've been with FCA and GM. The last couple of years I've been kind of here and there to various smaller clients. I have a bachelor's in industrial and operations engineering from U of M and an MBA from Wayne State University. So for the purposes of this project, I was part of a 2-person team that went into this client and helped them with kind of starting from the ground up, line balancing and standard work. They had very little. So about our client, it's an automotive manufacturer that has seen a ton of growth in the last few years. With this growth, they haven't been able to meet customer demand. They're using a factory that was built in the 80s. They've done a lot of changes to it, but they are still somewhat limited to the layout of the original plant. They're running production 24/7. They have a 4-shift pattern where they work 4 days on, 3 days off. So you have 2 day shifts and 2 night shifts. They're building 4 different vehicles, and they pretty much do everything internally, including stamping, plastics. They have 3 body shops, 3 general assemblies, and they actually have 2 paint shops now, but when we were starting this project, they just had 1. And the reason we were brought in is because of all this increased demand, they were not able to keep up with it. And they identified that the paint shop was one of the main issues, where you have 3 body shops and only 1 paint shop. So we were brought in, we kind of did our initial investigation. So one of the big things we saw is that not only is there no standard work, but there's no standard process. So if I go in on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. and watch a station, by 4 o'clock that day, you might be seeing a totally different process. There might not even be a person there anymore. So that was a huge problem with not only throughput, but also quality. So all in all, there were 52 jobs that we looked at. As I said, about those 4 vehicle models, and all of the models had unique option content. No existing system or standardized process. Some areas in the plant have their own systems. Some of them use Excel, some of them use like a cloud SharePoint. There's a homegrown system that they've started using in some areas now as well. And within just the 1 paint shop, we even saw multiple. If you talk to one engineer, they use one thing, and their partner working on the next line over will be using something totally different. Some of the jobs did have process sheets, but they were never accessible by the floor. They were always kept in someone's computer, and not even all of the engineering team would have access to them. There would be different versions that may or may not be accurate, and it was always hard to kind of figure out what is the accurate version. Do we have an accurate version? So that was kind of some of the main issues we saw. And after that initial investigation, we actually discovered that Proplanner had already been in use in a different area of the plant, and they still had licenses active. So we were able to get in touch with the people that had used it in the past, and they were still using it in General Assembly, in one of them. So we were able to get with them, use some of their licenses, and get some knowledge on how they had used it and what they were able to do, and take that over into the paint shop. So after we had kind of decided Proplanner is the tool, we went in and evaluated all of the jobs based on the process sheets that they might have had, but mostly we actually went out onto the floor, talked to the operators, talked to the team leads, observed the jobs, took a lot of videos, actually in the middle of this project, COVID hit. So we had to kind of scramble in the last couple days and took videos of all the jobs right before we got sent home for a month. So Proplanner was really helpful to be able to take those videos and input into actual work content. So all in all, once we were done with everything, we ended up with reducing 18 heads a shift. So over 4 shifts, that's 72 people that we were able to optimize, which is a savings of over $5 million a year. And this took us all about 8 weeks to complete. So kind of the specifics of after we had observed the jobs, how we used Proplanner to get to that final solution. We created routings for each area. So ED, booth, wet stand, final inspection, each line had its own routing. And then within each routing, activities corresponded to each station. We always use a time standard called MODAPs to document all jobs. So we used MODAPs and estimated times, which was a stopwatch. Stopwatches we only used for if there was like a robot sealer time that needed, that was a consistent, always a time. And then we also used model codes to break out each of the 4 vehicles to specify any of the unique option content. So once we actually put everything into Proplanner, we were able to create line balances that just showed a current state. I would say this was far and away the most useful tool, or the most useful like part of communicating with the client of here's what you actually have right now versus here's what you need. So we were able to use those graphs to really show here's your tack time, here's your efficiency. You guys have 15 people and you actually only need 10 or whatever the number would have been. So after we were able to do the line balancing, the current state, we started playing around with what the future state would be using the line balancing module itself with the drag and drop elements. We also worked a lot with the process engineers and the actual people on the floor to run trials, make sure everyone agreed, and get that involvement from them. So once we were gone, they would be able to kind of take the torch and continue using the tool and continue with all the improvements. So this is an example of slatline, 2 of the line balances we did. So this was the current state where you can see their tack time was 54 seconds and 85% utilization, about 46 seconds. None of those jobs are coming even close to that 85%. This is what we ended up with, where we took out 2 jobs, balancing that content over the previous jobs, and getting everything a little bit closer to that 46 seconds. And so once we figured out here's what we want to do for our future state, the next step was creating standard work. So this is just an example of some of the standard worksheets that we printed out and have posted at every station. So just a pretty standard elemental description. They asked us to include time in all of these just because that kind of alerts the operator on if they're falling behind or not. This client has a lot of operator turnover, so it becomes a really helpful training tool when they're looking at this to learn their job and knowing if they're in the ballpark or not of how long they're taking. And that's also a huge indicator of if repairing defects is taking longer than we're showing in our standard work, that there's a possibility that there have been quality issues. So that's also served as a big benefit for team leads to be able to communicate better with their supervisors and more quickly catch problems as they are occurring. So from this project, as I said before, the line balance graphs, we definitely loved. That was the #1 thing that the client liked. And it was a huge tool, not only with our direct client, but with everyone we worked with, the process engineers, the team leads, the supervisors on the floor. It was just a really great way to easily say, here's what you have, and here's what you could have, and here's the changes you could make. And with that, the line balance module, you can drag and drop elements within the line balance module onto whichever bar to see what a change would look like if you made it. So that was a really easy way to get involvement from people on the floor who may not know how to use Proplanner really in depth, but we can work with them to just drag and drop, and here's what this would look like. Oh, that's a good idea, let's try it. Oh, maybe that won't work. So that was a huge benefit as well. And then just in general, standard work, having it is a tool that the client is able to use now to train and check. Previously, they didn't really have any way to train or check other than whoever the person that was around on that shift at that time, what they had known, their word of mouth knowledge. So now there's a documented way that this is how everything should be done, and this is what we're tracking to. Probably the biggest complaint that we've had from our client now that they are in charge of using this tool on their own is just now that when you are making changes in the line balancing module and you've decided on what change you want to make, it's not really easy to then apply the change to the routing. What we ended up doing is we'd make the changes in the line balancing module, have everything how we wanted it, take a screenshot, and then go back into the routing and make the changes in the routing versus applying the changes. It just made it a lot easier to track. And we had a couple of instances where changes were applied and the person who applied them lost track of what was changed. It just got really confusing and murky. Another thing that we had some challenges with was value add and non-value added classifications. For this client, they had about 30 different choices within value add and non-value add at a code level. So if I have an activity that has, 30 different codes that make up walking to the car, placing something to the car, identifying a defect and fixing it, you would have to go through each of those 30 elements and classify which value add or non-value add you would want. So that ended up being just too time consuming and we weren't able to really utilize it. And so the Yamazumi charts in theory would have been really great, but we just weren't able to kind of make that happen with all of the different classifications. And then finally, probably the biggest issue we ran into on this project, and this happened both with my team and the client's team, was cloning routings and not knowing that there's a little checkmark button that links everything together. So if I clone a routing, now I have two of them and I change an activity in one or I delete an activity in one, it deletes it everywhere. So that caused a little hassle more than once of trying to get that data back and figuring out what was deleted and when. Let's see. So from the end of this project, the client is still maintaining Proplanner in this original paint shop, and we were also able to use it in a second paint shop that launched a couple of months later. So we ran into some of the cloning routings issues. Everyone is trained, including the floor supervisor, so they are able to actually go in and make changes, usually hand in hand with process engineers, to make their own optimizations and tracking. So all shifts are also now following the same process because they have that standard work tool for training and checking. And one of the big benefits we saw from this is that the huge increase in throughput and quality. So throughput increased by 20% in the first 2 months. It's since increased even more, I think, to about 40% more than when we started. And then overall quality has also improved as well. So that was all I had. I can answer any questions anyone has now.
It looks like right now we don't have any raised hands, but as always, if anyone has a question, please just raise their hand or submit it in the Q&A chat as well. And it looks like we have one question from Dave. Dave, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Lindsay. We really appreciate it. And one of the questions I had, I know you're a pretty strong MODAPS person. You've used it for quite a bit. What was your experience there with regards to the client? Was the client really familiar with the predetermined time system? In other words, were they using a predetermined time system, or is that something that you brought into the customer?
So I'd say yes and no. So as we said, that there's like a bunch of different systems depending on who you talk to or what area you're in. We found that within Paint Shop, they were mostly using stopwatches, but in other areas of the plant, sometimes they actually were using MODAPs in a couple of places. They also use MTM. They've also used most. So they definitely know what predetermined time was, but we kind of were able to show them that MODAPS is usually the most beneficial system to use. And we trained all of their process engineers and they're all now MODAPS certified.
Okay, good. So did you use any, with Proplanner, a task has multiple times. You can do an observed time, you can do an estimated time, and you can do a predetermined time, which is kind of unique, right? Most systems just have a time. Did you use any of that hybrid time capability? Like, did you leave in the estimated time and then fill in a predetermined and then do the priorities?
Yeah.
Of the stopwatch time. How did that work?
Yep. So a couple times we did that. One was when, as we got sent home from COVID and we were working from home and off videos and process sheets, we used those estimated times then. And then we were able to go back into the plant and really kind of narrow down and this is exactly what it was. Then we were able to change those times into the actual MODAPS codes. We also used it when we were helping with the second paint shop, where we just cloned the routing, changed all of the times to estimated. And then once we were able to actually observe pilots, then we started to change those estimated times to calculated.
Great, excellent. I just wanted to kind of end too. I really appreciate you bringing up, the learning curve of things, even for our organization, of things we can do better. And I want to mention that those challenges you ran into were, great documented issues with our workflow that we are prioritizing to make easier to use, better, and if you will, to your point, kind of try to make certain features like, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I mean, that's the power. We have to be careful of how we do the UI, but thank you very much. That's been great. Yeah. I think Johan had a question.
Yep. You should be able to speak at any time now.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. You mentioned here that you had problems with all the different classifications of value added and non-value added. Why did you have that many? Was it a requirement, or could you
so
just,
I think we actually, with Dan, we kind of realized that the client had set some of those classifications themselves. So it was kind of a catch-22 of like, they had all these classifications and they wanted these Muda charts, but they wouldn't let us change it or make it any easier. When they were just using Proplanner in one small area, I think it was a little more manageable to have like 30 different classifications versus what we wanted was 3. So
yeah, so lessons learned was that it wasn't really a Proplanner issue. It's more that you have to decide on what level of detail you want to go into and what is feasible to work with.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.